Housing has never been more unaffordable. Home ownership rates are falling, rents are rising, and young people are trapped by a crazy housing market. Against this backdrop, Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, says he is a YIMBY. He wants to build 1.5 million new homes, even on greenbelt land, and we should ignore any local opposition to get it done. But how many homes does the UK really need to build? And what will be the effect of building so many homes on living standards, the housing market and the environment? Now, before we answer this, we could say there's a golden rule of British politics. Politicians promise to build millions of new homes, but once in power, they ignore their own manifesto commitments. The Conservatives promise to build 300,000 new homes a year, but the reality is nowhere near. When Labour is in power, they failed to meet more modest targets. The Lib Dems have a manifesto commitment to build more homes, but they win by-elections by opposing new building. So when Labour promise 1.5 million new homes, we can take it with a pinch of salt. But putting that aside for a moment, do we really need to build this level of housing? And would it solve the housing crisis and make housing more affordable? Now, supply skeptics argue that building new houses will do little, if anything, to reduce housing costs. For example, if you allow new housing in cities, unless it is specifically affordable housing for low-income groups, they claim it will do little to reduce unaffordability. But in fact, building new apartments can lead to the gentrification of an area, an influx of rich people, and can actually raise rents. But is this justified? And before I answer that, another reason for supply scepticism is that the UK population is actually growing more slowly than previously predicted. Between 2011 and 2019, England added an additional 2 million homes. But the number of households in England and Wales only rose by 1.4 million. Ian Mulhern of LSE claimed in 2018 England had 1 million surplus housing. 5 years ago, England's population was expected to be 57 million, but it turned out to be actually 500,000 less. In 2014, there was a forecast of 216,000 new households in England per year, but 4 years later, this has been revised down to 150,000 new households. So you may ask, where does this target of 300,000 come from? Reasons for slower population growth include falling birth rate, a cost of living crisis causing young people to stay at home living with their parents, and until last year at least, lower immigration than expected. However, this narrative has to be taken with considerable caution. The UK has one of the lowest rates of spare housing in Europe. We haven't built at the same rates. Shelter claims a waiting list of 1 million for social homes, and other studies suggest a shortage of up to 4 million homes in the UK. There's a prolonged backlog and suppressed household formation. We need to build more to catch up with this backlog. Housing is so expensive, young adults are reluctantly living with their parents. If supply was greater, they could choose independence, which of course would be good for both parents and children. Also, the idea that increasing housing supply doesn't reduce prices is misleading. Increasing supply does reduce price. Even if you only built at market prices, evidence suggests that everyone will benefit from lower housing costs. Supposing you build expensive apartments in London, it will only be the rich and high-income people who will move in. But if the well-off move into these new expensive apartments, it will reduce the pressure on demand for everyone else. Now, ideally, a mix of housing needs to be built. The UK's greatest shortage is definitely in the social sector, which has seen a fall of 1.4 million in recent decades, as council housing has been sold off but not replaced. But the crucial thing is that increasing supply does increase affordability. Now, people may ask, how come house prices have risen so much in the UK, despite the fact that we are building? The reason is that supply just hasn't increased enough. Now, a really good question is, well, how much will prices fall if we build 1.5 million new homes? What impact will it have? Now, there are quite a few studies which suggest that for every 1% increase in supply, the price of housing and rents will fall by 1.5%, or at least be 1.5% lower than otherwise. So this could mean if we build an extra 1.5 million homes, which is a 6% rise in supply in the next 5 years, prices and rents will be around 8% less than if supply had stayed exactly the same. So with average house prices at around 260,000, it would mean prices of 244,000. Not insignificant, but hardly a magic bullet for solving housing affordability. It shows that a bigger impact on house prices and rents is the effective demand. But here's the thing, if interest rates stay elevated for the next 5 years, then combined with increased supply, there will be a good chance for improved affordability for people trying to get on the property ladder and renting. Now, I should add, this is only a rule of thumb. There's no guarantee that prices will fall by this exact amount. The FT report the example of Minnesota in America, who have built the most number of houses in America, and the result has been a significant fall in the real price of rents. By comparison, Indianapolis, with the lowest building rates, has seen the biggest rises in rent. So there is a clear link between increasing supply and lower rents. But it's not just about prices. There are also other benefits of building more houses. Greater supply, especially where it is needed, will help increase geographical mobility. It will increase labour productivity and boost economic growth. Building houses close to where people work can also help environmental issues. A lack of affordable housing can cause people to commute further to work, increasing the use of cars and congestion. Building high-density housing with good insulation and solar panels will have a significant environmental benefit. And also, if we don't build new housing, it will definitely increase the perceived and real intergenerational inequality, which is becoming an issue in the UK, with home buying become dependent on age and parental support. However, having said all that, on the other hand, we can't ignore the downside of building more houses, the ever-encroachment onto greenbelt land. The truth is we all like the idea of building more houses until it comes into our backyard, and NIMBYism is an issue. Now, Labour claim they will try to build on brownfield or greyfield sites, and this is all very good in theory, but in practice, brown belt land can be surprisingly expensive to develop, and not necessarily where people want to live. Now, another factor is that it's not just about how much housing that you build, but where and what type of housing that you do build. The biggest shortage of housing in the UK is in the south, and also the private rented sector. Landlords have recently been squeezed by rate rises and new legislation. Building affordable social housing for rent would be the most helpful target especially for those vulnerable to homelessness, and it will reduce the pressure from the private rented sector, which is seeing very strong demand and limited supply. A willingness to build higher housing density, European-style apartments, could also increase supply with relatively less impact on the green belt. But at the same time, we need to avoid the mistakes of the 1960s-style council blocks, which became a magnet for social problems. Building houses is not a magic bullet for improving affordability. But if we don't build houses, it will store up more problems for the future. Building the right kind of housing is definitely part of the solution. A current concern is that the private sector is really pulling back from starting new houses. This has been due to a shortage of skilled labour, higher costs, and a slump in demand. So this is an example of a potential market failure, and it does create a case for substantial government intervention to think about the long-term housing needs of the country. And another problem the UK has is the fact that the buy-to-let sector is in real crisis. Landlords are selling despite rents soaring. This video goes into more detail about why we have such a problem in the private rented sector.